$850 trillion. That is the size of the market Ripple just quietly stepped into on August 27th. A number so massive, it makes all of crypto look like a rounding error. Now, the internet is screaming that XRP just took it over, but that is not what happened, and the honest version is actually bigger. Because what Ripple really built is a single door that lets the biggest institutions on Earth trade stocks, indexes, and crypto all in one place. It is quieter than the hype. It is smarter than the hype. And for XRP holders, what it signals might matter far more than any price prediction you have ever heard. So let me show you what actually happened and where XRP truly fits. Here is how we are going to do this, and we are going to do it the honest way. First, I'm going to show you exactly what Ripple launched, in plain English, no jargon. Then, I'm going to tell you the truth about that $850 trillion number, because it does not mean what the headlines are telling you. Then, we get to the good part, where XRP actually fits into all of this, and why it could matter for years. And finally, I'm going to show you a second announcement, one that almost nobody is talking about, that could one day let you earn a return on the XRP you are holding right now. No hype, no fake screenshots, no fantasy price targets, just the real story. This is Crypto with BHW, and this is the honest version. Quick note before we dive in, this is not financial advice. Everything you hear today is my personal opinion and research, for educational purposes only. Always do your own research. Okay, let us get into it. So let us start with what actually happened, because the real thing is genuinely impressive once you understand it. On August 27th, Ripple launched something called the Delta One business inside a platform called Ripple Prime. And to get why that is a big deal, you first need to know what Ripple Prime even is. Ripple Prime is Ripple's institutional prime brokerage arm. Now that phrase, prime brokerage, sounds intimidating, so let me make it simple. A prime broker is basically the heavy-duty back office for giant investors, hedge funds, asset managers, trading firms. It is the service that handles their trading, their clearing, their financing, all the plumbing that lets big money move at scale. And Ripple did not build this from scratch overnight. They built it from their $1.25 billion acquisition of a firm called Hidden Road, which closed back in late 2025. This is not a toy. Ripple Prime already clears more than $3 trillion a year, and it already serves over 300 institutional clients. Now, on top of that machine, Ripple just added Delta One. And here's what Delta One does, in plain language. It lets those big institutions trade something called total return swaps. Stay with me, because this is simpler than it sounds. A total return swap is a contract that lets an investor get all the gains and the losses of an asset without actually owning the asset itself. Think of it like renting the performance of a stock instead of buying the stock. You get the price moves, you get the dividends, but the asset never has to sit in your account. And what can they get that exposure to? 3 things: United States listed stocks, major stock indexes, and digital assets, meaning crypto, all in one place. That is the key. Ripple is now offering a single door where a hedge fund can get exposure to Apple stock, the broad market, and crypto, all through one counterparty. They call it cross-margining, which just means instead of keeping separate piles of collateral at separate firms for your stocks and your crypto, you manage it all in one relationship, which frees up a huge amount of capital. And it runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which the traditional stock market absolutely does not. There is one more detail that matters, and it is about trust. Ripple built this with what they call a conflict-free model. Most of these Delta One desks at the big banks sit right next to their own trading operations, which means the bank can end up trading against its own clients. Ripple Prime does not do that. It only handles the clearing and the financing. It is not betting against you. And to back all of this, it is standing on more than $1 billion in regulatory capital, plus a fresh $275 million funding round they just closed. This is a serious, well-funded, institutional-grade operation. The president of Ripple Prime, a man named Noel Kimmel, called it a natural extension of everything they have already built. So that is what actually launched. Real, big, and built for the largest players in finance. But here is where the story gets twisted online, and I need to untwist it for you, because that $850 trillion headline is not telling you the truth. All right, Let us talk about that giant number, because this is where the hype and the honesty part ways. $850 trillion. It is a real figure. It is roughly the notional size of the global derivatives market. And notional just means the total face value of all those contracts added up. It is one of the biggest pools of value in the entire financial world. So when a channel flashes that number and says XRP took it over, I completely understand why your heart skips a beat. But here's the honest truth. XRP did not take over that market, not even close. And I say that not to disappoint you, but because you deserve the real story instead of a fantasy. When a hedge fund uses Ripple's new Delta One service to get exposure to a basket of stocks, that swap does not settle in XRP. It is not buying XRP. It is not using XRP as the asset. The equity swaps reference stocks and indexes in crypto, but they are not powered by the XRP token itself. Anyone telling you that every one of those $850 trillion is suddenly flowing through XRP is selling you a dream, not a fact. So then you might be asking, okay, if XRP is not the asset in these swaps, why should I even care? And that is exactly the right question. Here is the honest and frankly more interesting answer. What Ripple is really doing is building a massive on-ramp for institutions. Think about it. They are getting the biggest hedge funds and asset managers on the planet to plug their daily operations into Ripple's ecosystem. Their trading, their financing, their collateral, all running through Ripple's pipes. And once those giants are inside Ripple's world, using Ripple's rails every single day, that is when the real opportunity for XRP begins to open up. Because you do not capture a market by shouting about it. You capture it by quietly becoming the infrastructure it runs on. So the number is real, but the takeover story is not. What is real is far more strategic, and that leads us straight to the question that actually matters for you. Where does XRP genuinely fit into this machine? Let me show you. Here is the honest place where XRP fits, and it is worth understanding clearly because it is the difference between a fairy tale and a real thesis. Ripple has three pieces on the board. It has this giant institutional prime brokerage. It has XRP, the bridge asset built to move value quickly and cheaply anywhere in the world. And it has RLUSD, its own stablecoin, which just crossed $2 billion in size. Three pieces, one ecosystem. Now watch how they connect. As more institutions come inside Ripple Prime for their trading and financing, Ripple gains something incredibly valuable. A captive network of the biggest financial players on Earth. And inside that network, over time, XRP and RLUSD can start to capture specific jobs, moving value between systems, acting as collateral, handling settlement, and the behind-the-scenes plumbing that happens after a trade is done. None of that requires XRP to be the stock in the swap. It just requires XRP to become a useful tool inside a network that institutions already trust and already use. And that is the strategic genius of the whole thing. A single counterparty across traditional finance and crypto pulls institutions deeper and deeper into Ripple's world. The more they lean on Ripple Prime for the boring, essential stuff, the more natural it becomes for them to reach for Ripple's other rails when they need to move value. XRP does not win by being hyped. It wins by being right there, ready, the moment a real need shows up. But let me be honest with you, because that is the whole point of this channel. This is a gradual process, not a light switch. There is no guarantee that every function flows to XRP. Other tools exist. It has to be earned, use case by use case, over years. So here is my simple yes or no question for you today. If the biggest institutions on Earth slowly start running their daily trading and financing through Ripple's rails, do you believe XRP eventually finds a real role inside that machine? Yes or no? Drop it in the comments because I genuinely want to know where your head is at on this one. Now, all of that is the long game, the big institutional picture. But there is a second piece of news from this same stretch that could touch you, personally, and your XRP much sooner. And almost nobody is giving it the attention it deserves. Let me show you. Here's the part that I think matters most for regular XRP holders, and it is happening on the XRP Ledger itself. There are two upgrades moving through the system right now, with two very technical names, XLS65 and XLS66. Forget the names, here is what they actually do. Together, they would bring native lending and something called single asset vaults directly onto the XRP ledger. And this could become one of the ways you finally earn a return on the XRP you are holding. Let me explain how a vault works, because it is genuinely simple once you see it. Imagine a shared pool of money. You deposit a single asset into it, say XRP, or Ripple's stablecoin RLUSD. In return, you get shares, which are basically a receipt that says how much of the pool you own. Now that pool does not just sit there. It lends that money out to borrowers at interest. As those loans get paid back with interest, the total value of the pool grows. But the number of shares stays the same, which means each share you hold is now worth a little more. When you want your money back, you redeem your shares and you collect your slice of the pool, including the earnings. You put money in, it goes to work, and you take more out later. That is yield, built right into the ledger. And here is why this is designed for the big players, not just retail. This is not some risky, anonymous free-for-all. It uses real-world credit practices. There is off-chain underwriting, meaning actual professionals assess whether borrowers are creditworthy. There is first loss capital to absorb some risk. There are fixed loan terms that banks and asset managers can actually understand. And crucially, these vaults can be permissioned, which means they can be gated so that only approved, regulated institutions are allowed in. That is the exact kind of structure a serious financial firm needs before it will ever touch on-chain lending. And because it is built into the base layer of the ledger itself, it avoids a lot of the smart contract vulnerabilities that get other networks hacked. Ripple has been putting this through intense security audits, including advanced AI-driven reviews, before it ever goes live. And real builders are already lining up to use it, with names like Soil, Clearpool, Cicada, and Evernorth preparing products on top of it. But now comes the honesty, and this is important because the hype crowd will skip it. This is not live yet. These upgrades are still going through the XRP Ledger's voting process, where the network's validators have to approve them. As of right now, one of them sits around 40% support, the other around 37%, and they need to hold above 80% for 2 straight weeks before they can actually switch on. So this is coming, but it is not here today. And any yield you might earn is never guaranteed. It depends on real borrowers, real demand, and real risk. So this is a reason for genuine optimism, not a reason to count money you do not have yet. So step back and look at the full week. In just a few days, Ripple stepped into institutional derivatives and moved to bring native lending onto its ledger. That is a company laying pipe, quietly, everywhere. So what does all of it actually mean for you? Let me bring it home. Here is the honest takeaway, and it asks you to hold 2 truths at once. Truth number 1, what Ripple did this week is genuinely significant. They pushed deeper into the institutional financial system. They strengthened the ecosystem that XRP lives inside, and they moved a step closer to letting holders earn yield on-chain. The direction is real, and it is strong. I am not going to downplay that. But truth number 2, and this is the part the loud channels leave out. This is a long game, not a magic switch. XRP did not take over an $850 trillion market this week. There is no secret $10,000 plan. And no, Brad Garlinghouse did not post that. When you see a screenshot of a dramatic tweet that just happens to confirm your wildest dreams, slow down and ask whether it is even real. Because a huge amount of what circulates in this space is manufactured to get your click, not to inform you. Protecting yourself from that noise is one of the most valuable skills you can build as an investor. Now let us ground it in the actual price. As I record this, XRP is trading around $1.45. It has had a strong run over the past week, and it even popped on the Ripple Prime News, but it is still sitting below the high it touched near $1.70 just days ago, and far below its old all-time peak up near $3.65. That tells you something honest about this market. In the short term, price moves on emotion, on hype, on momentum. In the long term, it moves on whether this technology actually gets used. And those two things do not always line up on the same day. So what should you actually watch, if not the screaming headlines? Watch the real signals. Watch whether Delta One actually pulls in serious institutional flow over the coming months. Watch whether those lending upgrades cross that 80% threshold and finally go live. Watch whether RLUSD keeps growing, and whether more institutions keep plugging into Ripple's rails. Those are the quiet, boring, honest indicators that tell you this thesis is really working. The fireworks and the fake tweets tell you nothing. The infrastructure tells you everything. And if you can train yourself to focus on the infrastructure instead of the fireworks, you will be calmer, sharper, and far better prepared than the people who ride every hype wave straight into every disappointment. That, right there, is the honest edge. So let us bring it home. This week, Ripple stepped into one of the largest markets on the planet, not by having XRP magically swallow $850 trillion, but by quietly building the kind of institutional infrastructure that real financial power is made of. And at the very same time, on the XRP Ledger itself, the pieces are being put in place that could one day let you earn a return on the XRP you already hold. It is not a fairy tale. It is better than a fairy tale, because it is actually real, and it is actually being built, right now, brick by brick. So stay grounded. Ignore the fake screenshots. Watch the infrastructure, not the fireworks. And keep showing up, because the people who understand what is really being built are the ones who are never fooled by the noise. This has been Crypto with BHW. We're early. The foundation is being poured, and I'll see you in the very next one.